Welcome to ClueCon Weekly. Join us every Wednesday to learn about the latest cutting-edge developments in the real-time communications industry. ClueCon Weekly is brought to you by FreeSwitch Solutions. Get support and professional services directly from the creators of the FreeSwitch open source project, solving your issues in the most efficient, stable, and scalable way possible. Get the FreeSwitch advantage. Visit freeswitch.com. Also brought to you by ClueCon, the premier technology conference for developers by developers. Join us every summer in Chicago. ClueCon kicks off on Monday with our annual hackathon, The Coder Games, followed by 3 days of technology-rich presentations discussing telecom, WebRTC, and IoT from developers around the world. To learn more, visit ClueCon.com or call 877-74-A-CLUE.
And welcome to ClueCon Weekly. Today is the 8th of August, and today we'll be joined by Mr. Mark Monday from Phonism. We'll be talking about a lot of the cool things those guys are doing over there, so stand by for that. We're also going to have Mr. Michael Malvarudis be talking to Mark, and he'll be talking to somebody from the FreeSwitch team on your community corner questions. So stand by for that. First, let's go over to Mr. Josh Young for the news. Josh, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right, Kenton. Hello to the community out there. Thank you for joining us here on ClueCon Weekly. If you have any questions during the call, you can comment in the YouTube, HIP chat, or the IRC channels, and we will try to get them answered during the interview. FreeSwitch Solutions is now offering a live virtual training. You can learn the basics of FreeSwitch operations from the comfort of your own home or office. Our next 8-hour training is scheduled for August 16th, so be sure to send an email to training@freeswitch.com for more information. The ClueCon videos have been released, so if you missed ClueCon this year, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. We have all of our videos and all of our speakers at the roundtable, and if you enjoy these, well, be sure to join us next year, August 5th through August 8th. And we are also open for ClueCon 2019 sponsors. So get in early, take advantage of all the sponsor perks. If you're interested, send an email to marketing@cluecon.com. If you have any questions on how to use FreeSwitch in a particular way, you can check out the FreeSwitch with Fred videos. We have several videos that will help teach you some of the techniques involved with FreeSwitch there. And if you have any suggestions for future videos you would like to see, you can also send a request there to marketing@cluecon.com, and we will continue to add instructional videos periodically. So make sure you check in for those regular updates. And as usual, be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and sign up for our mailing list for these and even more fantastic news and announcements. Thanks for watching. Back to you, Ken.
All right, thank you very much for that information there, Josh. Now we're going to jump over to Mr. Michael Malvarudis. Mike, who do you have joining us for Community Corner this week?
We have Michael Jarris coming in today, and we have a really interesting question. Oh, by the way, and thank you for joining today. So we have a question from Tom Fielding, and he asked on the FreeSwitch users list, "Hi everyone, I have a Lua script running from dial plan. However, when the call hangs up, the Lua script stops. I need the script to run completely before being stopped by hangup. Is this possible? Do I need to spawn another script using Lua Run to accomplish this? Thanks."
So, yes, it's absolutely possible. Let's talk a little bit about Mod Lua and the different modes to run it. So, there's actually a handful of different ways you can run Lua scripts with Mod Lua. One of which is what you were originally talking about, which is running it as a session using the dial plan application. Another way to do it would be the FS API call for Lua. And then there's some other more interesting ways to use it, such as event consumers and dial plan and things like that. So the parts that are interesting for this problem are the running Lua as a session, as a dial plan application, and running as an API. And I think you're right that the right solution for you is going to be to go ahead and spawn another script running it as an API. But let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of a Lua session. Lua sessions run as API are always run start to finish unless they encounter an error. But Lua sessions that are run via the dial plan application have some special handling based on how it interacts with the session. So there's a few things that are special in those cases. One is the hang-up hook functionality. So that allows you to, wherever you are inside of your Lua script, when the hang-up happens, it'll call your hang-up hook, it'll jump to your hang-up hook callback. And the other is the need to do the session ready at different places throughout your script. So the reason for this is the Lua actually runs kind of in the same context of the session. And because the session can change state out from underneath you, you need ways to check if the call has ended or there's been other events and act on those. It's a similar way that we handle, say, the callbacks, ETMF or ASR while you're doing IVR actions. So the session ready is a special action that checks if any of those states have changed and call those callbacks, kind of jump to that functionality. It's really important, particularly if you're doing something like a loop of some sort or anything else that's potentially going to have to act on the session to call session ready first. And that's what allows us to jump to that hang-up hook. So because of that special behavior of the Lua flow when you run it as a dial plan application, if you want something to run completely, but while it's running, you are going to want to do something like BG API running the Lua as a separate script. That has an added benefit of if there's any blocking actions in there, it won't actually impact what your session's doing at the same time, because all those blocking actions would actually keep things, including audio, from flowing on the session. So you want to do that asynchronously in the background. So it'll solve both those issues. If you have a different kind of script, let's say where you wanted to do some cleanup always at the end of the call, the hang-up approach is another good approach. It's also possible, there's a variable you can set that'll allow the script to keep running, but any things where you access the session will fail. It's maybe reasonable in a couple edge cases, but generally I find that it makes your little code much less easy to understand and to debug and deal with the flow of different points where it might fail. You end up making a much more complicated script. So breaking things up seems like a much better solution in this case, with some added benefits such as doing things in the background.
So within the script, what are some of the things that the audience should be cognizant of about, in conjunction with memory management and that type of stuff?
In conjunction with memory management. Let's see. Things like get variable. If you're doing get variable in a loop, every time you do a get variable, it actually duplicates that string. So if you're doing that many, many times in a loop, that could get, over a long period of time, that could get very expensive. Much better to do things like callbacks for DTMF or certain events that would allow for something like that instead of very quickly doing get variable over and over again. The more you can do things asynchronously, generally, the better off you are. And understanding that anything inside of these sessions, these dial plan Lua scripts, anything that blocks will actually stop audio processing or other things. So sometimes those things need to be done asynchronously, even outside of the script, to keep that behavior from happening.
What about like compiling the Lua?
Compiling Lua, I think that there's some JIT functionality now. I think it does it on the fly. I don't really recall when. I think that went in 5.2 on Lua. So it depends on what's on your system. Most newer OSs do have 5.2.
Well, thank you, Mike.
Awesome.
Answers from the experts.
Thank you.
So today we have Mark. So Mark, tell us about yourself.
Hi, Michael. Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you for coming in.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I'm Mark Monday. I have been in the telecom business for many, many, many years. I worked at Cisco in the Bay Area for about 16 years. Was right there in the beginning of when Cisco started doing VoIP, basically. Started thinking about how we might support telephony in remote offices for Cisco customers when they had lots of remote offices, branch offices, et cetera, and concerned about how they extend VoIP all the way out to the branch office. So I started early on with that. I had no real traditional background in TDM. It wasn't like I was a person of knowledge in the old switched voice networks, but certainly in VoIP. And then went on to drive some of the business around Cisco with building their SPA line of phones, some of the small PBXs that Cisco built into the routers, Call Manager
The old
Express.
Sephora stuff.
Yeah. Well, and the Sephora for sure, and so I had a lot of fun times at Cisco. Really creating and driving products and creating opportunity for Cisco and our customers. And then the last 6 years or so before this, I was at Avaya, also another telecom PBX call center provider, which many people know about. I was VP of the communications group there, where we built the PBXs and the phones and things like that, and spent some time working a lot with enterprise customers as well as small business customers, and started seeing the light of really what open telephony really meant and OpenSIP, and you just don't see that so much out of some of the more larger vendors. Cisco's are obviously starting to come around quickly with the acquisition of BroadSoft and more focused on OpenSIP devices in their business, but some of the older companies that have been around a long time are having a hard time changing to this OpenSIP environment. So it made me start thinking about where should I be, and that's how Phonism came about.
Cool. And so tell us about Phonism.
Yeah, so Phonism is a company that provides provisioning and management services to VoIP devices, and we have been around probably for about 16 months in an actual sales and service. But before that, what happened was there was the founder of the company, Stephen Lazaridis, or Steve. He was experiencing the problem that many people experience today, and that is that how do you deal with so many different phones, so many different phone types, so many different manufacturers, and how do you keep them in sync and provision them and ensure that they're always on the latest firmware? And typically you look at these MSPs in the market space today, and it's taking so much of their time to just keep the devices going and operable and configured correctly for the customer or the consumer. So Steve came up with the idea that there's got to be a better way, and it's got to be through the cloud. And so that's how Phonism actually started. He started developing code in his spare time and created a great online cloud service that's available today as Phonism to do the provisioning and management of devices.
So it's an interesting concept. Tell us more about it.
Okay, yeah. So Phonism is just a service, and I think about it as we provide, and what we provide to our customers is a cloud-based service. so that they can simplify, aggregate, and manage devices in bulk ways. So what I mean by that is, just take an example and walk through it. Today, when you want to configure an IP phone, there's really three ways to do that. One is that you can go into the user interface on the phone itself and look at the little screen on the device and type in all the parameters that are specific to that phone. So it might be a dial plan parameter, it might be which SIP server it's talking to, it might be which time server it's using, and that can be tremendously cumbersome and challenging to do through the phone interface on the keypad. There's also, of course, usually they have a web server inside of them, and you can just web service right into the phone itself. And you're looking at the configuration of that device, and you can set the configuration. And again, it's a one-by-one thing. You're setting each phone uniquely for that customer. With Phonism, basically, you add the MAC address of that device into Phonism as a cloud service. You've gone into a web browser and you've brought up Phonism. You pick which customer is going to be using this device, and you just enter the MAC address. And you can then choose a preset configuration that you've made for all, let's say, Polycom VVX 400 devices. You would like them all to have a very, very similar configuration. They might have a slightly different dial plan, or they might have a slightly different set of configurations, which how the buttons work and which button does what. But generally, they're going to have the same config. So you just enter the MAC address in Phonism, and when that phone looks for its new configuration, automatically it will get configured. There's nothing else to do. The phone itself, the power of that is the phone itself can be shipped directly to the customer. For the MSP, they don't worry about it. The phone will come up, it'll receive its configuration that they've set for VVX 400s, and wham, the phone's working and communicating with the switch.
You guys basically have a unified provisioning server.
Yeah, so I think that's a great way to look at it, but we are kind of both switch independent, although we've just done a really cool integration with FreeSwitch, and that's one of the reasons we were just at ClueCon as well, is that we now integrate directly with FreeSwitch so that we can share the user information between the two systems. But generally, we're kind of independent of the switch, and we're agnostic to the manufacturer of the device. So we support Polycom, Yealink, HTech, Grandstream, Cisco, Mitel, Avaya, Comptel, a whole bunch of different types of phones, so that an MSP runs across a customer and they go, gee, I got Yealink devices and I got HTech devices. I want one system to manage them, and that's what Phonism provides.
So tell me about the integration with FreeSwitch. Because we love FreeSwitch.
We do too. We do too, and we're really proud and pleased to be a part of it at this point. So we created the one challenge you have when you're provisioning phones is that the user information has to be in two places. It has to be in the switch itself, in FreeSwitch, and it has to be, and the phone itself needs to know about it. So Phonism needs to know about it. And so before we did the integration, you basically had to download the user configuration and then upload it into Phonism through a Excel spreadsheet, for instance. And it was a little bit manual, a little bit tasking, and keeping it in sync was a problem, because a user would leave the company, or a user would join the company, and then you didn't have that information on the VoIP credentials inside of Phonism. So what we created was a little Python agent that runs on the FreeSwitch that constantly stays in touch with Phonism. It's open source, so the FreeSwitch community can take it and adapt it to and adjust it and do whatever they might want with it. But it will keep, in general, if what it'll do is keep the two systems in sync. If you create a user in FreeSwitch, Phonism will know about it, and will have the VoIP credentials so that the phone's getting the right set of configuration. we're hoping that the community, the free switch community, then takes that and expands upon what else can be done with that information, further integration into Phonism with more than just user credentials, et cetera. So we're excited about that development community out there to take it and run with it.
So basically, you're configuring it so FreeSwitch is just the registrar, and so
That's right.
Are you planning on going into like PBX, offering PBX type services or stuff like that?
Well, so we don't want to replicate anything that's done really well. There's no intent to go, duplicate things that are already done really well. So what you'll see out of Phonism is not to try to duplicate things, but to synchronize things that might be valuable to the two systems so that they're sharing information. And in fact, the next stage for us would be that if you entered a user credential in Phonism, it would share it back with FreeSwitch as an example versus just one way the other way, so that you get more and more usability out of the system. But that's not, the direction is not to replicate what's already done really well. The direction would be to add value to what might be already there with FreeSwitch. Example, one of the things that we're embedding in Phonism here in the near future is QoS of the device itself. So think about the quality of service that device is experiencing, and Phonism being able to then report and alert and tell whoever it is that's monitoring the system that there's an issue on a certain device or a certain set of devices, or even at a location where there's 100 devices, as an example. So we'll plug in value adds essentially that complement the switch and not necessarily replicate it.
So you calculating like round trip timers, or
yeah, they'll be
looking at the MOS scores, or
that's right, everything almost. So whatever makes sense in trying to calculate that QoS on the device itself, but MOS certainly being able to report it on an individual calls and groups of calls, and then creating reports so that an MSP could then provide that back to their customers and say, look, here's the quality of service you're getting. Maybe we ought to adjust your network settings as well, besides just the switch settings.
Let's upgrade your internet connection.
Yeah, exactly. That, MSPs are out there to make money, and we want to facilitate helping them do that.
So how did you get involved in this?
Yeah, so my story is kind of interesting because I was, as I mentioned, I was VP GM at Avaya, and we started about a year and a half or so ago. Avaya started creating OpenSIP phones. I had done the same thing back at Cisco when creating the SPA line of devices that Cisco has. And so then I finally got around to getting it started at Avaya while I was there. And the immediate need that I saw was twofold at Avaya. One was that they needed to be able to manage the OpenSIP devices that were selling and compete in the market space. And then two was that the installed base of phones at a company like Avaya is huge. And the same thing at Cisco and Ericsson and all the, the traditional players, if you will. The installed base is very, very large. So all of these customers are looking for ways to manage their devices better, understand what devices they have, be able to migrate the devices from one switch to another. And so these things were starting to become apparent and appropriate to Avaya customers. And so I started looking around for what is a solution here, and that's how I came across Phonism. And today I'm there because I thought it was just such a interesting perspective on the market, a great opportunity for enterprise customers as well as MSPs to provide new services to their customers with existing devices. So I ended up at Phonism.
Yeah, so just explain, like, from a network topology, how this all works.
Yeah, so great question. So Phonism runs in AWS, and it's running as a service. A user of Phonism can log into the service, and they will see their own, their own private tenancy of Phonism, as an example. And inside of that architecture, they could have layers of their own customers. So typically, just think of an MSP, they might sell to 100 different customers, and each customer may have 6 locations or even more. And so that hierarchy exists inside of Phonism so that they can see their customers, where they're located at, and manage each of those locations and each of those customers uniquely. And beyond that, they can manage each set of types of phones. So they can manage the VVX 400s differently than they might manage the Cisco SPA 500 devices, as an example. So that what happens here is that the devices, of course, are sitting on the customer premise. Phonism is sitting in AWS, and the phone itself needs to get a configuration. It needs to get an update or a change that you've applied within Phonism inside of the web service. So what the typical outcome here is that the phone itself is set on a timer base to look for a new configuration every hour, let's just say, or maybe every day. It depends. You know, after an install's up and running, not unusual to switch the phone to say, let's just go to every 8 hours for a new config. And so the phone itself a timer will go off and it'll say, I'm going to go look for my new config, or maybe new firmware for that matter. And if it will make a request, a secure request to Phonism to get that information, and Phonism will serve it if it's authorized to do so. And that might be a config change. It might be a new firmware that the manufacturer has now come out with. So the power of that, Michael, is really nice because you can set up new firmware for all VVX 400s, as an example again, a Polycom device, and every one of them, when they request their new config, will then get new firmware. And because they're randomly, setting off timers that say, I want to go see if I have a new config or new firmware, there's no overload on the network itself because they're not all doing it at once.
Yeah, and so with Polycom, I mean, I'm not entirely familiar with this, but Polycom, they don't have the ability to push the firmware, right? I think Yealink does, but not Polycom, right?
Yeah, there's different manufacturers have different resources. Polycom has a unique little application that they just acquired from a company called OBHI. OBHI was a small company that spun out of a guy named Jan Fandriato, which he was the creator, the engineering leadership creator of the SPA devices at Cisco, and Jan reported to me. Later, he spun out and created OBHI, and then that was acquired by Polycom. So yes, Polycom does have some capabilities that are unique to the Polycom devices. I'd say the difference between what Polycom's doing with their management application and what Phonism's doing is that Phonism is independent of the manufacturer. We support beyond. We do everything for Polycom, but we also do it for Yealink and for Grandstream and for everybody else, right?
So there's been a lot of new phone manufacturers recently, right?
Yeah, that's keeping us busy for sure. And interesting pockets of. I was just talking to a guy this morning in Dallas, Texas, and there's an amazing amount of Fanville devices in Dallas, Texas, as an example. And yet you might not see them at all in another portion of the U.S. or around the world. And so, yeah,
I guess it's the strength of the local sales channel, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Who's doing well in that region. And the thing that's interesting here about that, what we're running into is really a new phenomena, and that is the migration of devices. So what you've seen is that certainly there's a proliferation now of OpenSIP devices in the market, and customers typically own those devices. They've bought them. And yet they might be, and they typically are very interested in switching services. They might be going to a new FreeSwitch instance, as an example, and the MSP out there is trying to migrate that customer from whatever switch they're on today. Could be an on-premise switch even, it could be a cloud-based switch, and turn them onto their service because it's better. And so migrating all of those devices over at one time so the customer doesn't experience any downtime is a big challenge. And that's where Phonism is playing a role for those MSPs to take those devices, migrate them over so that the customer really doesn't experience any difference. The buttons remain the same and the operation remains the same for the individual users, but then the customer's now on a new free switch instance, as an example.
And then from your perspective, you get a lot of phones where you don't have to reprogram them because they're all the same internal, right?
That's right. That's right. And so all we need is the MAC address. You know, we tell the MSP, just enter the MAC address in Phonism, set up the config the way you want it for these devices, and they'll migrate, and you can migrate them over as they request their new configs. So you really there's a period of time where maybe both switches are running at the same time, and then all of a sudden it's all free switch.
Well, we like being a free switch all the time.
I know. You know, the real question I was going to ask you, and I thought was interesting, is when's the last time you actually used a phone? When's the last time you picked up the handset, on the phone and dialed a number with it besides your cell phone?
So, it's funny. I don't have, I've had this conversation a lot recently, but I don't have like a cognitive memory retention for phone numbers anymore because I'm never dialing them, right? And so, I mean, I have just for myself, I have an Angular app that just runs in the browser, and it imports the Google phone book, right? And I just click on it and it calls it. And so I'll sit there. I have a Polycom. I think it's like a 600 or something, and it's it just it bridges the call, auto answers, and I just it's right here.
So
it's
you're using
my ear.
You are using the phone, but you're using your headset to connect with it, and you're not really dialing. And that was my observation a few years ago. Is that I'd be sitting in the office, and here I am, a phone manufacturer. I was working at Avaya, and I'd pick up my cell phone to make the call because I had a better directory on my cell phone, right? And it was easier. It was easier than the phones themselves, since that's why we started thinking about outside the box of how do we make the desktop phone much easier. And one of those was, of course, integration, as you just talked about, with the PC or the Mac, whatever you might be using, as well as integration with the cell phone, but then also making the touch screens much more useful in the directory systems on the phones. But I think that it's also going down the path of what's happening, I think, in the phone world is that while in general the usage of the desktop phone is going down because we do more and more communications on the PC and Mac itself, on the laptops, but you start looking outside of the tech industry, and that the use of the phone is still huge, right? And the fact that they're still required in many cases to be on every desktop, and so we're kind of tainted in a way by living in the tech world, so to speak. But in the real world out there, in the State Farm insurance offices, or in the operation of the restaurant or whatever, there's still phones around there, and they need to be there so that they can get the assistance or talk to the customers or whatever it is that they need to do. And so they're going to be around for quite a while. So, but as that changes, I think Phonism's prepared to change as well. But really, for us, it's just a MAC address. What's that MAC address mean to us, and how do we provision it and look at it and report it and audit it and all those things.
Well, I think that application that I told you about, the browser application, I've been using that for years and years and years. And so it's had a couple of different versions. Like back when I used to have a Mac, there was like a plugin in the address book application, that just made an RPC call, right? And so, things definitely evolve. And if I was going to even take a look at it today, I would definitely use Verto, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's just, you have, I can't pull it out, but this has it's just got a digital, it's got what is it called? Like a digital handset or something? And you plug it into USB and it just takes care of everything. It works everywhere.
Right.
And so, essentially this is the new phone with the software layer taking care of everything.
Yeah.
And what's happened is I've started carrying this earpiece with me like I would carry a cell phone.
Ah.
And that's something that's really changed. But
Yeah.
going back to memory retention of numbers, I mean, nobody dials numbers on a pad anymore. Like
Right.
I will go, like you said, I will go out of my way not to dial a number. Like if I
Because
if
you
I have
can't
to
get it
use my
right
cell
the
phone,
first
I'll
time
use my cell
anyway.
phone.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, and it's all now 10-digit dialing. You can no longer dial this 7 digits, and so that's 3 more to remember and get right every time you're trying to click on the keys.
Well, and if you watch some of the old movies, like The Godfather, they referenced like town names, right? So it wasn't even full numbers.
That's
It
right.
would be like somewhere in Long Island, and
Yeah.
this person's name, and they connect you.
Yeah. Go back to the
I
switchboard with the.
spoke to someone sometime where I think they were in like Wyoming or something, and they remember as being a child, they had like party lines or something like that. So a
Yeah,
group of
unfortunately, I'm old enough
families.
to remember that as well. I don't remember myself having a party line, but I remember the concept of it, where 5 people's homes would all ring at one time, if you were on a shared party line, basically.
Yeah. So
I'm a
I
long ways.
mean,
Yeah.
there's constant evolution.
Yes, absolutely right.
There's constant
Yeah.
evolution.
I
So
did want to
what's
talk to
next
you
for
about
you
well,
guys?
I was going to talk to you a little bit about security as well, and make sure that we covered that for the listener here, and how important it might be, I think, for them to understand. So
Security is very
obviously,
important.
yeah, obviously, there's multiple ways to think about security of the devices themselves, and how we communicate with those devices. Traditionally, what you saw in the big switch, on-premise switch environment was TFTP was being used, because it was all on-premise, and there wasn't any big concern about security. Well, that's just not true today. Everything is going over from cloud device itself typically, and we're communicating with that device we have to communicate in that device with a secure way. And so Phonism uses HTTPS to do that. And we do a variety of things around security, not just the communication of it, but the storage of the data itself being encrypted. So using SSL as an example to encrypt the data when we're talking to a device. Authenticating the device or set of devices is really important. So we make sure that you have the ability to authenticate a location, so that any device at that location has to have the right credentials, essentially, to talk to Phonism. And then beyond that, we do a few more things. One is we make sure that the device is authorized to talk to us. So this prevents kind of the wrong MAC addresses or configs being served up to the wrong devices. So we look at the requesting device has to have the right MAC address and has to match in a table. Has to be at the right tenant location. It has to be the right brand and the right model of device. If any of those don't match, we don't serve up the configuration to that device. So ensuring that it is the device it says it is, and it's going to get the configuration that you've applied to it. And then beyond that, we of course ensure that the data we're storing on those devices is encrypted in AWS, as well as then supporting even the new European general data protection laws, where GDPR is now a requirement of the European data laws. So
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, they just came out with in May a whole new set of concerns around keeping data secure for users, and it wasn't just about phones. It was about data in general. Any information that you have as a provider of information on a user is susceptible to being covered by these European data laws, GDPR. And so some of the simple things really are that you have to be able to completely clear the content of data that you have if you're requested by a user. An individual could go in and say to Phonism, I want you to eliminate any data that's associated with me. And so as a provider of that information, we have to be able to comply with that. And you have a time limit within GRP to be forced to go do that. And so it's great. I mean, I think the laws are really designed around protecting the individuals and the data around them. And so I think all that is really good, but it required all of us to go back and look at how we handle data on an individual basis, not just even on a company basis.
Yeah, personal information privacy has just
Yeah.
been an enormous topic recently, especially with everything that happened recently with Facebook and all that.
Yeah, and it's not going to get any easier. So I think that's one of the benefits of systems like Phonism and others is that we're looking at it from a perspective of security and insurance of that protection of that data. And when we thrive on that, we have to make sure our customers understand that we protect their rights and their data as well. So,
But for your customers, it's also mitigation over mitigation too, because essentially you provide the compliance for them.
Right, exactly. So our customers, for instance, we serve a variety of customers. Anything from a distributor who is selling devices, and they might sell them pre-configured for a certain switch. For the reseller. So they use Phonism to do that one-time provisioning of the device, as an example. And of course, we have to protect them. We have to make sure that they're being protected as a distributor in Europe, as an example, or a distributor and wherever they might be. We support MSPs that I've already talked about, where MSPs are using using free switch, and then maybe even migrating customers from other switches. So they need to be protected. And then another big set of customers for us is that enterprise customer themselves, who are moving bulks of devices from what might have been a traditional on-premise switch to a cloud switch, hopefully free switch in that case.
Oh, that's interesting. So,
yeah, so
what's next?
You asked what's next. Yeah, so I think I've already, there's a couple of things kind of going on. One is that you mentioned it, lots of new phone providers, believe it or not. And so just, ensuring, when we support a device, we support it for life. And so, you look at that Polycom with a set of, 15 different devices in the repertoire of library of devices. We have to be able to serve up a config on any version of firmware that device is running. And so when we onboard a new manufacturer, let's say it's right now we don't have support, for instance, for Fanville devices. So as we add support for Fanville devices, we're looking at it as a lifetime insurance, right? That device will get a config from us whenever it needs it, no matter what load of firmware it's on. So that's one of the big things for us, is being support of all those manufacturers who seem to be coming out of the woodwork to sell a new
lot of these are
just phone.
A lot of them are just OEMs, though, right? Isn't Fanville an OEM? I think it is.
No, Fanville is. You mean of buying devices from somebody else? Not that I can tell, because although I've talked to them a little bit through email and a little bit directly, they're their own manufacturer as far as I can tell. But that may be not true of others. You may have a really good point. Also, what's next, of course, is not only just.
That's why I said before, I was like, sometimes you don't even have to rewrite the configs.
That's right. That's very true. That we look at them and go, wow, that's really similar to somebody else. But you do have, it is a different MAC address, and the MAC address is associated with a different company, and so we need to ensure we're serving up the right config for that model. But Then, of course, I talked about QoS and reporting of that QoS and alerting. And then also, I mentioned that today the way that model works is that the device requests the configuration, and that's both for security reasons as well as for us to be sure that the device is getting the configuration you want. But let's look at it from the other perspective. Customer calls you, Mr. MSP, and says, gee, I really want the buttons on my phone to work a little bit differently. You can make those adjustments in Phonism and then say to the customer, well, just reboot the phone. Well, that's a pain a little bit. Customers don't know always what that means. They don't really want to feel comfortable unplugging it. So we're going to do a protocol called TR69 that will allow us to reboot that phone on demand, basically, and apply that new config immediately so the customer's happy. So just kind of going down those paths of ensuring that we're providing the best capability to the MSP so that they can be a great customer or a great provider of service to their customers. And then, beyond FreeSwitch, of course, is just integrating with other switches as well, because the importance of that is people are going to migrate around, and we see a lot of people moving to FreeSwitch. We want to be able to do that integration so that as they move to FreeSwitch, we can read out all of the important information for the devices and move them on to FreeSwitch.
So how much does this all cost?
It's free for a while. So we're just putting in a new free trial actually in place. It's not quite ready, but for anybody who wants to try Phonism, we can work it out immediately that they get a free trial to start using the device, using the product. And then it depends on the number of units you have. Our list price is for like 1 or 2 devices, which is unusual. You're not really going to see people using Phonism for 1 or 2 devices, but it's $1.50 a month per device, and it goes down in volume. We have customers doing thousands of devices per month, and they're of course at a much lower price. So it's the average price we see in the market right now is about $1.10 per month per device. But remember, you never have to roll a truck, and you can do everything remotely through the cloud, and you can do everything in bulk. And so that really, really provides a lift or a freedom to the MSPs to be able to go manage these devices and ensure they're operational.
Yeah, and especially when they're dealing with a lot of these MSPs are nationwide, so it's impossible. Yeah. It's impossible with that for them to actually, do.
Yeah, if you have to roll a truck, you've lost your profit for the year. So, yeah.
More.
Yeah. Very good.
So, do we have any questions from the audience? Let's take a look.
No,
I think we do.
I mean, there was a question from Mr. James Bodie for Mark about open. He kept referring to SIP as open SIP, and I think there was a little confusion there. But I think correct me if I'm wrong, but you're referring to SIP there being open as an open standard, not as something proprietary thing like.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think of it as the difference, and I came from it from a Cisco and Avaya world where our SIP was really not open, and yes, we used SIP to talk to some of those devices that connected directly with our private switches, so to speak, Call Manager and other devices that Cisco and Avaya had. And yes, we were using the protocol, but it wasn't open. I think of open SIP as this market where I can buy a phone from 17 different manufacturers, and it works with 17 different switches. And so that's to me what I was referring to in the world of open SIP.
There you go, James.
So I actually, while I was in Chicago, I had lunch with Steven one day.
Really?
I forgot what.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there was I think Nick was there too.
That's right. And Steve was there. This is our first year at ClueCon, and we really enjoyed it. Got a lot out of it, by the way. And in fact, certainly intend to continue to be a part of ClueCon. We did the integration with FreeSwitch, and then said, "Gee, we need to be a part of ClueCon." So we attended. Steve Lazaridis, as you mentioned, our CEO, was there, and Nick Capullo was there as director of marketing. So really, really useful conference. They came back just glowing with information, and couldn't wait to share it with the rest of us back at home.
Yeah, a lot of the attendees always, have great time. That's one thing you hear over and over is
I think it's both. It's a great time, but it's also just so useful in the way of the content and information available, and the sharing of that, just the community around it.
Okay, well, thank you for coming in today.
Absolutely.
And Ken, back
Thanks.
to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark and Michael. So we'll be back here next week for ClueCon Weekly, so you guys watch for the announcements on that. As Josh mentioned earlier, go check out the FreeSwitch YouTube channel. All the videos from ClueCon are there, so you can watch those. Also, be sure to subscribe and then click that little bell icon that pops up on YouTube, and you'll get alerts as we do more live broadcasts in the future and as we post new videos. We'll see you next week. Have a good weekend.
You've been watching ClueCon Weekly. Tune in every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central. Keep up with the latest happenings by subscribing to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or visit us at freeswitch.com.